This episode is brought to you by Physician Services USA. Physician Services USA is your trusted partner in streamlining operations for independent physicians and medical practices. Their team of dedicated, South Carolina-based professionals takes the hassle out of billing, credentialing, practice management solutions, and more. If you'd like a well-run practice with all of the efficiency and none of the headache, visit physicianservicesusa.com today and discover the support you deserve.
Welcome to the IndeDocs podcast. Today we're sharing part one of a 2-episode conversation with Dr. Arlen Meyers. A quick disclaimer, we're sharing our personal opinions based on our own experiences, so nothing should be taken as professional, legal, financial, or medical advice.
You're listening to the IndeDocs podcast, where we discuss important issues related to our mission to preserve, promote, and protect the practice of independent medicine. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us for this discussion about saving private practice and how we can start to change things for the better. I'm Marcelo Hochman. I'm a facial plastic and reconstructive surgeon in Charleston, South Carolina, and I have a great guest today, Dr. Arlen Meyers, whom I've just recently reconnected with. He is the president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. He's an emeritus professor at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and holds an MBA degree as well. I'm excited about having Dr. Meyers because his background and also some really important ways of looking at what the problems surrounding medicine and healthcare today are. Arlen, welcome to the IndeDocs podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to reconnect, as you said.
Yeah, it's nice. As I mentioned, you're the president and CEO of SoPE, or the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. I'll give you a chance to tell us a little bit about that during the talk, obviously. But one of the things that was interesting to me about having you on is that we both have shared a little bit of a similar route in that we've done the private practice route, we've done the academic route, we've done the employed route, the independent route, and maybe you can recap a little bit of your story for the audience and how that might inform some of the things that we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So actually, I would characterize my journey as the boomerang route. So what I mean by that is that when I finished my training, I got recruited to the University of Colorado many, many years ago. This was in the mid-'70s. And my first gig was at a city and county hospital, a safety net hospital, which was an affiliate of the University of Colorado residency training program. So I was essentially the attending at an affiliate hospital from an academic medical center, and I spent several years there. Eventually, I left that and then went into various forms of private practice. I joined a group that was a multi-specialty medical group where I was the otolaryngologist. And then eventually, in some other things, I was actually a contract doctor with Kaiser. And then I wound up starting my own private practice, which I did for about 7 years. After that period of time, to make a very long story short, I wound up selling the practice and going back into what would be characterized as academia, where I stayed in various roles, the VA, academic centers, et cetera, until I did that and retired from seeing patients in 2015 as an emeritus professor. So I would call that like a boomerang. It wasn't, it was academic, private, academic.
Yeah. Mine was more the linear one, where from after fellowships, my first job was academic, 10 years, and then went into private practice since, but have maintained an affiliation, with the academic center here locally. So one of the things that I thought would be interesting is, because you and I both have seen medicine from I think, virtually every angle, not only from the physician point of view, but also the patients that we encounter in those. Tell me a little bit about how that has formed your opinion about what some of the problems are that we're facing in medicine, particularly independent medicine. And of course, we're going to spend some time talking about, the root causes and some of the solutions that we may or may not have. But tell me a little bit sort of how that experience has informed your view of what you see as the problem nowadays with medicine.
Well, you and I both know there are multiple problems, but I would say that they derive from three basic places. One are personal, second are organizational, and third are systemic. So by personal, I mean the mindset of the doctor and where they come from and how they're thinking about their future. By organizational, I mean 75-80% of physicians are employed. So whether you are employed or whether you decide to go into a private practice, for example, that is single specialty but multiple person, like plastic surgery or otolaryngology or some other specialties, now you're in an organization and there's some organizational issues that create problems and opportunities, incidentally. And then finally, there are the well-known systemic problems that derive basically from rules, regulations, and healthcare policy that cause a lot of mischief.
Right. And I think the third one, the latter one, is the one that is probably the one that comes to mind in the public's eye and, gets a lot of attention in the press. Obviously there's a lot of financial impact. And so there's a lot of attention on that. But the other two are the ones that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on, because especially the first one, and you can bring in obviously SoPE and what you're trying to do with that. But one of the things I've noticed in speaking with physicians who are sort of trapped in their situation, it truly is a mindset issue. I mean, they're these super smart people who are very capable, and yet they don't seem to have the ability or the knowledge, or maybe you can explain what it is, to sort of think their way out of their situation. Talk a little bit about that and what your perspective is.
Well, my perspective is that what we're talking about, particularly as it relates to people considering going into private practice, has to do with what I call medical practice entrepreneurship that supplements or supports medical practice management. So you could ask the question, so from a personal perspective, what are the things that influence a resident or fellow graduate to pursue a certain employment situation? And in my view, there's several. One is, obviously, we don't teach the business of medicine, innovation, or entrepreneurship in medical school, or in residency, or in fellowship. Now, in some fellowships, particularly in plastics, you're working mostly with private practitioners, so it rubs off. But in general, so I think the educational system is at fault. And that's us. I mean, all of these things are created by us, so we can undo them. But it's a question of how we do that, and do we have the will to do it? The second is that the mindset, the culture of medicine, of academic training, is one of conformity and competition. That's how I got into medical school. I guess that's how you got into medical school, because doctors are told since they're 8 years old, you're the smartest kid in the room and you need to compete with everybody else and get in.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that culture is not compatible with the entrepreneurial mindset, because that's a culture and a mindset of creativity and collaboration. And as well as we're only allowed to get outside the guardrails a certain amount. It's called standard of care. And if you do, you wind up into a lot of problems. So you're not given a lot of wiggle room in how you approach a given problem. It's pretty rote, it's pretty prescriptive, and you suffer medical legal consequences if you don't do it. In terms of collaboration, the fact, in my view, is doctors simply don't play nice with each other. So there are all kinds of turf wars, particularly in plastic surgery. We've been through that road. The specialties don't play nice with each other. Nurses, doctors, dentists, public health people are sort of in their own silos. So I think from a personal perspective, and then finally, the final one really has to do with, do you have an entrepreneurial mindset that supplements the clinical mindset? And that really derives from nature and nurture. I mean, can you learn? It gets down to this age-old discussion of, can you actually teach people how to be an entrepreneur? And the answer is, sure, you can teach it, but how much of it is actually learned in the classroom? And that leads to the issue of, well, what is it that we're talking about when we say entrepreneurship? Because if you ask a lot of people, they're going to get a lot of different answers.
Sure.
So let me give you my answer and how this fits into what we're talking about. So my answer is that physician entrepreneurship, and in this particular case, medical practice entrepreneurship, is the pursuit of opportunity under volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous conditions with the goal of creating user-defined value in multiples compared to the status quo or the competition, with the ultimate goal of achieving the sextuple aims using a viable business model. Now, that's a long, complicated definition that's got a lot of pieces to it. But the bottom line is, it's about creating user-defined value or stakeholder-defined value that beats the competition and is not going to put you out of business. Now, there are many, many ways to do that. The conventional notion is, when we say physician entrepreneur, usually what pops into someone's mind is, oh, this guy's creating a company, is going to scale it and sell it for $1 trillion. Yes, that's one way to do it. But if you follow the definition I've just given you, there are medical practice entrepreneurs. They're essentially running a healthcare service business. There are educational entrepreneurs in edtech. There are intrapreneurs, people who are employed physicians, but try to create value for their employer. There are social entrepreneurs and public health entrepreneurs. So there's lots of different ways to skin this cat. I'm certainly not arguing with, if you want to go out and create a medtech company or another AI company, knock yourself out. But this conversation is about medical practice entrepreneurship and why that's important for career satisfaction and success.
So one of the things that I've, when I give lectures to the fellows and the residents and even medical students, which I think fits into what you're saying, is to think about creating the environment that you want to practice in that you have total control of what you feel would be gratifying, would be, and there are a lot of different, ways to define success. But, I think it's important that physicians realize that we really can create the practice environment that we want. And like you mentioned, it could be in an employed model, it could be in a hybrid model, it could be in an independent model. But being honest about how you want to practice medicine, to me, is sort of at the core of it. Is, we talk a lot about the doctor-patient relationship, and that gets instilled, and oftentimes I think it becomes a little abstract. But for me, it actually is the central core. Is, how do I want to relate to that other person who is trusting me to deliver their care? And in every single situation that you just mentioned, it's different. There's a different interaction, there's a different relationship. So to me, the defining how you want to practice medicine on a very personal, one-on-one level, I think helps inform sort of what practice environment might be more conducive, for yourself, that might might be more gratifying for yourself. What do you think of that?
Well, I think the main issues have to do with personal situation, particularly money. I mean, let's face it, if you're $268,000 in debt as a medical student, then you're going to have a certain viewpoint of risk. It has to do with your family situation. It has to do with whether you're a woman or a man. It has to do whether you're purple, green, blue, or yellow. It has to do with a lot of factors that unfortunately determine or interfere with your success. So I think there are personal factors. If you have a lot of FU money for whatever reason, then you're going to have a different perspective than someone who is trying to make a living when they're 34 years old. Now, FU money means how much money do you have? I mean, I can't say it over this podcast. You know what F stands for. But you have enough money that you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about your future income stream. That's what I mean by FU money. Whether you inherited it or whether you had a previous company, however you got all this money, I don't care. But most of us are not in that situation. Several, in the 1% are, but most of them aren't. So the first element is the personal circumstance. The second has to do with the practice business model. So in other words, if you go to work for the VA, if you go to work for an academic medical center, if you go to work for a safety net hospital, if you go to work for a multi-specialty group, et cetera, if you work for the Indian Health Service, and I've worked for all of them, they all have a different culture, a very different culture. It is not the same. Employed medicine is not the same. It's different all over these places. So that has to do with, are you comfortable and is there a fit with that culture and your mindset and situation? And finally, there's geography. So, there's a big difference if you practice in a red state versus a blue state. There's a big difference if you practice in a state that prohibits competitive agreements or non-disclosure agreements or restrictive covenants than one that doesn't. There's a big difference in how much money you're going to make in one state versus another. So there are all kinds of issues that I think you have to consider that may or may not result in a decision to work under certain circumstances in a business model in a certain time or place in the United States, or for that matter, outside the United States.
Right. Yeah, I think, you have to be honest about what motivates you as well. Like you mentioned, and you may have a family, you may have, children, and that comes into play. You may have personal health issues that may come into play. And so, again, being honest with what are the motivating factors, the debt, all those things, of course, are important. We'll be right back after this break.
If your business or organization would like to connect with thousands of physicians and other medical professionals across South Carolina, we invite you to apply to join the IndeDocs sponsorship team. Various sponsorship levels are available, and each one helps support our mission to promote, preserve, and protect the practice of independent medicine. For more information, please visit our website at IndeDocs.com. That's IndeDocs.com.
You mentioned the non-compete clauses and those type of things, and I think that sort of falls more into the systemic side of things, which gets a lot of play. The issue of how do you teach somebody or coach somebody into realizing what are the things that they need to consider in order to make an informed choice as to what path they want to take with their specialty, regardless of the specialty. So how do we approach the issue of a resident in a specialty, for example, like pediatrics, where, famously now people hardly even think of private practice as an option, even though there are good business models to do it. So how do we start addressing that part of things, is educating future physicians or physicians in training so that they're not at the end of their 15 years of training and all of a sudden have to decide what they want to do with their life?
Right. So just to your comment, actually, a recent article looked at which medical specialties are most likely to be in private practice. And actually, pediatrics was near the top. Now that's changing. And, all the specialties are becoming more and more employed in private equity and exits and all that.
Right.
But actually, pediatrics and, in fact, otolaryngology tends to be relatively private practice oriented.
Yep.
And they're relatively small single practice groups. So maybe 3 or 4 people in a group. We're not talking about 30 ENT docs with certain exceptions. So again, it has to do with the nature of the business model of the specialty. But to get to your point, I say I can't, way back when Socrates said, I can't teach anything to anybody. All I can do is make them think. I think it's the same thing. All I can do, so when you look at how do adults learn, there's the so-called 70-20-10 rule, which in medical education is totally backwards. And by that, I mean 70% of what adults learn comes from experience. In fact, Einstein said, the only way you learn is from experience and everything else doesn't matter. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. So 70% of what you learn has to do with your experience. 20% has to do with the people that you are involved with or that in your network that you interact with. 10% has to do with what you learn in school. The bottom line is don't let school get in the way of your education. And we have that directly backwards in medical school. We don't expose students to the private practice experience, to be very specific. Why? Because most of the people who are the teachers, like me, and maybe you, never were in private practice when they showed up initially. So what do they know about running a private practice? And we are limiting exposure to outpatient community doctors who are in private practice, where at least they could get some education and just experiential learning observation. If anything else, how to create an E&M code. I mean, just the basic stuff about how to run, how to do basic business of medicine, whether you are in private practice or an employed physician. Because ultimately, that's what's really going to depend. I mean, to get to the hard knocks, if you don't make numbers, particularly if you are an employee of a private equity owned practice, you're going to get the pink slip. So I call this when the white coat gets the pink slip. And, oh, by the way, when there is an exit, so this situation, maybe we're diverting a little bit, but it's something important that I think people listening need to understand in a private practice versus employed situation, because private equity is buying private practices. Their goal is to make as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, and exit and give it out to the stockholders. So that's the idea. And when you get laid off or fired, then you are most likely to join another employed situation that is bigger than the one that you came from. So it tends to be this doom loop in terms of accelerated employed physicians versus private practice. It's something that you need to think about. And probably you have friends, I have relatives that are doctors that have been through this private equity buyout game, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, that certainly has happened here locally where, for those who are listening, the private equity, as you mentioned, the end game there is invest a certain amount of money, squeeze the business down to as, quote, efficient as possible, and then sell it for a profit, and usually within 3 to 5 years or something. So the people at the top, the more senior partners tend to get the golden parachute, right? I mean, they're getting ready to retire, they get a big check, they stay on as the medical director of the practice. But then the junior people, when that 3 to 5 year cycle comes around, all of a sudden get sold to people who they've never even met, And that's happened several times here in town with ophthalmology practice, dermatology practices, usually, pretty lucrative practices. but the physicians keep on buying into that, depending on where they are in their careers, right? I mean, if you're within 5 years of retiring and you get a big check, that influences your decision, as opposed to, the physician who just got hired and she's just starting her career, but now is working for somebody she, like I said, hasn't even met. Going back to the medical education thing, you mentioned, that the students, the residents, they're exposed to, most of their mentors are sort of growing up in system medicine. I mean, they're professors, they're attendings, more likely than not nowadays have never been in private practice. Our generation, there was a little bit more back and forth. Like you said, you had the boomerang effect and that kind of thing. But nowadays, really, most of the trainees are being exposed to people who have never even been in private practice, have gone straight through training, got hired at an academic place, and that's their career. So when somebody comes to talk to them about how to negotiate a contract, or whether you should be looking at this or that, or how do you, what about the non-compete clause, that kind of thing. So how do you start addressing that? If we think that's a problem, which I think we both do.
Yeah, it's a problem. The problem is we don't teach the business of medicine in formal medical education training. And the reason we don't teach it, so you could say, well, why don't we do that? And if I ask 100 doctors, or ask you, knowing what you know now, what didn't you know then that you wish you had been taught? Usually the business of medicine pops up on the list.
Absolutely.
Somewhere, if not number one. So to me, the answer is, and this gets to this whole issue of MD, MBA programs and advanced training and all that stuff. So if you look at the reasons why we are not teaching the business of medicine, innovation, and entrepreneurship to medical students and residents, and incidentally, it is not a residency competency criteria. So there, when you complete your residency, we've been through this drill,
Sure.
You're supposed to check off the list and the boxes, and you take the tests, and then you get, okay, you can satisfactorily sit for the boards. Well, one of them is not the ability to practice medicine independently using a viable business model. That's just not something that we deal with. So number one is, that's not our job. So the refrain is, we can't do that. We have a hard enough time fitting all the stuff into the curriculum and finding the faculty and the resources and whatever to teach people how to be a competent doctor, let alone teach them how to practice the business of medicine. Number two, there's certainly extreme resistance to change in the culture of medical education. The last significant medical education reform initiative was the Flexner Report in 1912.
Yep.
We're over like 100 years already. Don't you think it's time?
Yeah.
Then you get to the issue, who's going to teach this stuff? And the other point, and there's this whole list of stuff, but also doctors are cash cows for MD, MBA programs that are affiliated with the same university.
Right.
So if you have a medical school, and right now there's about 200 medical schools in the United States, including allopathic and osteopathic schools, and about 65% of them have combined MD, MBA programs, and the MBA you get at the business school of that university. Well, we're an easy mark. You don't have to take the GMATs. You spend $100,000 at Wharton a year to get the MBA. And I would argue that it's just not the right thing to do.
Now, from somebody who has an MBA, tell me a little bit about your decision and what you would tell somebody nowadays thinking about that.
There's nothing worse than a reform sinner, because myself and some other folks were responsible for creating the MD MBA program in Colorado. But we were like the 6th or 7th program. It's another one of those things, well, that sounded like a good idea at the time, but in retrospect, where I am now. So I think that basically, and I get this question asked all the time, should I get an MBA if I want to be an entrepreneur? Should I get an MBA if I want to learn how to practice medicine independently? First of all, I think if you think getting an MBA is going to help you in private practice, you are sorely mistaken. It's a total waste of time for the reasons that I just mentioned. Number two, I think we need to teach the business of medicine in medical school and cut free this MD, MBA thing. It's like a bubble. Most MD, MBA programs, if you talk about the top 10 programs, that's one thing. But then when you get to the second and the third tier of MBA programs that are online and second rate, I just don't think that that's being fair, number one, to the student. The third problem is we are so credential happy that people think that if you get more initials after your name, you're more competent. Well, the reality is you aren't. I mean, you just have initials after your name. And that doesn't translate into, and my final gripe is that most, not all, most MD, MBA programs do not address the specific needs of medicine, the practice and business of medicine. They tend to be general programs in general business. And I think biomedical innovation and entrepreneurship is a separate academic domain because of the ecosystem and all of the issues associated with it. So I just don't think that most of the programs satisfactorily address that. My other point is, and I'll stop, is I think most MBAs deliver connections, credentials, credibility, and content in that order. So have myself having done it, I just did it when I was in private practice. And I was under the mistaken notion that maybe it would help me in private practice managing the practice. It didn't. It came from experience. It came from making mistakes. It came from not knowing what I was doing and not getting the right people. It came from not having adequate financial controls and having somebody steal money from me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's experience in the people. It's not what you learn in the classroom.
Do you think the MBA is more apt to help somebody move along within a corporate structure like a hospital system as opposed to independent practice? Or do you think that doesn't really even help in that situation? Because I see a lot of employed physicians going through, business school and leadership programs and all that, sort of moving within the corporate structure, right, not going out into practice.
Well, that's what I mean by credentials and credibility. The fact is that if you want to be a CMO of a hospital, if you want to be the CEO of a hospital, unfortunately, it's like the price of entry to get, like, have an MBA or advanced medical or business education. But that's not what we're talking about. And I think that's wrong. I don't think that's right, because I don't think it really has much to do with it in terms of success running a hospital or running a division or, and frankly, the problem is that we don't track the value that MD MBAs provide. So we've been doing this for a very long time, and we continue to churn out about 500 to 600 MD MBAs a year. We have no idea what these folks do when they're done and the value that they deliver.
Right.
So a lot of them just do it because they want to sit in a corner office and to be cynical because they don't want to see patients anymore, but they still want to pull down high six figures.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I have some colleagues who were outstanding physicians, really outstanding physicians. I loved working with them. Highly trained, clinically so good. And then for a lot of reasons, that personal mindset reason, drifted into the administrative side of things and got an MBA and is now, one of the acronyms, in the leadership board. But that happens very commonly nowadays. If the medical school isn't the place, ideally, it would be the place to teach the business of medicine, or at least some basic competencies in that. What are some other alternatives that we can do or that you've done to start introducing that change, at the level of the trainees, and at what level? Is it college? Is it medical school? Is it residency? All the above?
I've been pretty involved in the last couple of years, pushing this rock up the hill. And I can tell you that the organization that I work with and the people that I work with, we have, so the good news is Again, about 200 medical schools in the country. The good news is that we're seeing more and more cracks in the armor. That is medical schools changing their approach to 2+2, to basic science, to clinical. Some are going 5 years, some are going 3 years, some all kinds of programs. So I'm seeing more experimentation with curriculum reform in the last couple of years in various schools, and particularly, incidentally, in new, yet to be created medical schools, and a lot of those are osteopathic. So I think we're seeing progress.
To that point, here in South Carolina, that is exactly, there is an osteopathic school, and they're some of the most engaged with the private community, even legislatively and politically. I mean, they really are becoming a real focus for change in medical education here in the state.
Right.
And we're in a small state, so they're being noticed for sure.
Yeah. Two other points I would make is we need to be more in touch with the customer base, particularly generational attitudes. Now, remember, the average medical student is 24 years old. And if you look at the present generation of pre-meds, so to your point, I mean, actually, the entrepreneurial training and education is a P through 20 problem. So you probably know parents who have kids that go to STEM academies and go to elementary school and are already doing coding exercises and all that stuff. But I can't handle P through 20. I can only handle medicine as residents and fellows and medical students. But how we select medical students is wrong. I personally think that how we're doing that is another element of the system that needs to be reformed. And just think about it. Should organic chemistry really be a pre-med doctor killer? Seriously? In this day and age? I mean, we're talking about kids who know much more about artificial intelligence than you or I do. In fact, they've probably in some instances, have an undergraduate computer science engineering degree. And oh, by the way, they may have already started and sold a company before they applied to medical school. It's a different generation. So we've just lost touch with the customer. And I think we need to fix that. And then there's this whole issue of how we select students. So there's, it's a whole food chain. This is a wicked problem. In other words, it's a multi-systems engineering problem. You can't just fix one piece of it. You have to fix the whole thing, because when you squeeze in one place, the balloon pops out in another place. It's just a complicated ecosystem, let alone fairness, diversity, equity, et cetera, money, tuition, all that other stuff. There are multiple issues: faculty, burnout, length of training. So I could give you multiple examples of schools that are doing everything from 3 tracks: basic science, clinical science, engineering, and computer science in medical school. And the theory is that what we're proposing is we're trying to create, in this present 4th and 5th industrial revolution, what I call the new triple threat. And that's another problem. So if you talk about who winds up being the head of the department chair, the division chief, the dean, all the way up to food chain, they get recruited because of their so-called clinical expertise, their ability to garner research dollars, their so-called teaching portfolio, and then maybe they have some administrative stuff in their portfolio that indicates they would do a reasonable job. Well, all of those things have changed. And if you look at academic medical centers and how they function, the 3 main sources of revenue are dropping. Clinical revenue, certainly grants. I mean, just read the headline.
Sure.
And state support. So in my view, the academic medical center model is broken because decreasing clinical revenues, decreasing grants, and decreasing state support. So we're going to, and I'm not making this up. I mean, in this environment, people are trying to figure out, and already, universities and academic centers are laying people off because of lack of grant support and all that other stuff. And incidentally, It turns out that in the last medical school admissions cycle, medical school admissions dropped for the first time since, I think, 30 years. So, but it's a mixed bag. This is a good news, bad news story. But the point is, everyone was hyping the Fauci effect, that lots and lots of students were applying to medical school because they wanted to be involved in so-called fixing the problem and making a difference. Well, post-COVID now, 5 years, people are having second thoughts about going to medical school.
Interesting. This concludes part 1 of our discussion with Dr. Meyers. We'll be back soon with part 2. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure to rate and follow the podcast, as that really helps us to grow the community and spread the word about the issues we've explored today. And please tune in next time for another great discussion about independent medicine in South Carolina. From all of us at IndeDocs, take care and stay well.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the IndeDocs podcast. Our producer is Jenna Leaf. Promotional support by Uplift Marketing. Mixing and mastering by Noah Martin. Content editing by Jenna Leaf. Additional production support by Noah Martin, Rebecca Lockhart, John Robinson, and the IndeDocs Board of Directors. For more information, please visit us online at IndeDocs.com.